The goal of this lesson is to figure out how to use your calculator to calculate the side length of a triangle. We can use technology to find the trig ratios if we don't know the side lengths, as long as we know the size of the angle. So our calculator will help us to figure out our trig ratios if we don't know the different side lengths of our triangles. So for this, we're going to need a scientific calculator, and a scientific calculator has sine, cos, and tan buttons on it. So this is a scientific calculator. The sine, cos, and tan buttons are right in here. When you're using a calculator for your trig ratios, you have to make sure that it's in the right setting. So right now, this calculator is set to radians. There's an RAD at the bottom. Sometimes there will just be an R. In order to work with degrees in a right triangle, we need to make sure that our calculator is set to degrees, not radians. So I have a degree button right here. I just need to press that, shift it over to degrees, and press enter or the equal sign. So now my calculator is in degrees. So it's very important that it's in degrees, or else when you're doing your calculations, it will give you the wrong values. Okay, so we're going to use our calculators to figure out our ratios for these three examples. So sine 42 degrees, cos 68 degrees, and tan 25 degrees. So every calculator is a little bit different. You just have to figure out how yours works. Sometimes you just type in sine and then 42 and press equals. Other calculators, you might have to type in the 42 and then the sine. It totally depends on the calculator that you're using. On this calculator here, we type sine 42, and then we press the equal button, and it will give you a lot of digits, and we just need the first 4 digits. So we'll have 0.6691. So in the last lesson, we set up a ratio. So we had sine of theta equals, for example, 21/29. This is the same thing, except the fraction has been divided out for you, and that's why we have a decimal instead of a fraction. For the next one, cosine 68, when we type that into our calculator, we get 0.3746. And again, it continues on, but we'll just use the first 4 decimal places. And for the last one, tan 25, we get 0.4663. And again, it continues on, but we will just stick with the first 4 decimal places. So now we want to be able to find a missing side of a 90-degree triangle. So we're going to combine labeling the triangle with setting up our trig ratios, and then using our calculator to figure out the value of our missing side. So the first thing that we need to do is label our triangle. So we're going to start with our hypotenuse. So directly across from that 90-degree angle is our hypotenuse. It doesn't tell us which angle we're working with, but it does show us. It gives us an angle of 41 degrees. So this is the angle that we're working with. So directly across from that is going to be the opposite side, and then our third side is the adjacent side. So this question says, use the sine ratio to determine the value of x. So it already tells us what ratio we need to use. So we're going to have sine, and this time we know what the angle is. So the angle always goes beside our trig ratio. So sine 41 degrees And remember from SOHCAHTOA, sine is the opposite side over the hypotenuse. So we'll have sine 41 degrees equals our opposite side, which is x, over our hypotenuse, which is 16.42. So now in order to calculate the x value, I'm just going to put 1 into the denominator to make both of these fractions. And now we're just going to cross multiply. So we have 1 times x is just x. And then we're going to multiply sine 41 times 16.42. So when we do that, I'm going to type in sine 41, and I'm going to get the decimal. I'm not going to write this down. I'm not going to just round it off. I'm going to keep it there, and then I'm just going to put times 16.42 to get the answer of 10.77. We're just going to round that up to 1 decimal place. So the 7 bumps the other 7 up to an 8. So our x equals 10.8. So our 10.8, this is the length of the bottom side of our triangle. Okay, looking at the next example, it says use the cosine ratio to determine the value of x. So again, to start, we need to label our triangle. So again, we have our 90-degree angle. Directly across from that is our hypotenuse. We're given the angle of 15 degrees, so this is the angle that we're going to work with. Directly across from our 15 degrees is your opposite side, and the side beside the 15 degrees is our adjacent side. So we know that we want to use the cosine ratio because that's what it says in the question. So we've got cosine, and always beside cosine goes our angle. So cosine of 15 degrees. And remember from SOHCAHTOA, the ca part goes with cosine. So cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So our adjacent side is x, and our hypotenuse is 12. So again, I'm going to put a 1 underneath our cosine 15 and cross multiply. So 1 times x equals x. And then we'll have cosine of 15 degrees times 12. So type that into your calculator, cosine of 15 times 12. So our x equals 11.59, so 11.6. Okay, looking at the next example, it says use the tangent ratio to determine the value of x. So again, starting off, we're going to label our triangle. So directly across from the 90 degrees is our hypotenuse. We've got our angle of 51 degrees. Directly across from that is the opposite side. And then the side that's 4 is our adjacent side. So our tangent ratio is what we're using. So we'll have tan of our angle, so tan of 51 degrees. And remember from SOHCAHTOA, tan uses the TOA part. So tan is opposite over adjacent. So our opposite side is x. Our adjacent side is 4. Put a 1 underneath of our tan 51, and then cross multiply. So 1 times x is x, and this equals tan of 51 times 4. So use your calculator to figure this out. So tan 51 times 4, and we will get 4.9. So the next example does not tell us what trig ratio we need to use. It just says use the appropriate trig ratio to determine the measure of x. So we have to figure out, are we going to use sine or cosine or tangent? So first we do need to label the triangle. So here's our 90 degrees. Directly across from that is our hypotenuse. We've got an angle of 11 degrees. Directly across from that is our opposite side. And then that third side is our adjacent side. So in this one here, to figure out if we're using sine, cosine, or tangent, we need to look at the different sides. So with our hypotenuse, we have a value of 24. That's going to help us to solve for x. With our adjacent side, we have the x here. We need that in our calculation because that's what we're looking for. The opposite side, though, doesn't have any information there. It doesn't have an x. It doesn't have a number. So the opposite side is not going to help us in this one. So we're not going to use the opposite side. So now we need to look at SOHCAHTOA and see what our two sides match up with. So we have an adjacent side and the hypotenuse. So which one of these three is or has an adjacent and hypotenuse? The CA part has our adjacent side and our hypotenuse. So therefore, we're going to use cosine of our angle of 11 degrees. So our cosine of 11 degrees equals the adjacent side, which is x, over the hypotenuse of 24. So again, to solve this, put that 1 underneath our cosine 11, cross multiply. So 1 times x equals x, cosine of 11 degrees times 24. Use your calculator to calculate this. So we'll get 23.55, so that will round up, so 23.6. Just make sure that when you are calculating these, you're typing in the cosine 11 and then you're pressing equals. So cosine 11 equals, and then once you have that decimal, we'll multiply it by 24. So we do not want to multiply the 11 and the 24 together first and then figure out the cosine. We want to figure out the cosine first and then multiply by the 24.